Hello everyone and welcome back to Planet Zoo franchise mode. Today we're going all out with a huge expansion plan. We've got a nice amount of money in the bank, enough to have done some terraforming, so I spent about £150,000, whatever the currency is, playing around and experimenting off camera. I created this lovely mountain range backdrop with a number of waterfalls and rivers leading into a large lake, then a smaller runoff that almost hits our current build area. I decided against doing an episode on terraforming because I hadn't really done much of it myself and I didn't think it would be particularly good content to put out. But I do have a few touch-ups to do to make the terrain look a bit more natural, and I'd like to add a few smaller rocky outcrops and mountains to finish it off. So I'll show you guys how I do terrain forming on another episode. If you watched the last episode, you'll remember me talking about the bigger picture for this zoo, where we start creating some new habitats for our current animals with the aim to convert that entrance area into a large-scale development with shops and smaller exhibits, leading into a huge safari tour that takes our guests through multiple biomes and continents. That's going to involve us leaning heavily into research and getting as much done as possible so that we can have a multitude of creative options, as well as expanded staff facilities and guest transport. So I'll be looking to get that done in my off-camera sessions whilst I'm tidying up, and possibly during some of our building and expansion videos. Basically, I'm just going to leave the game running while people are coming in, donating money, and my mechanics are working on all of that lovely research. We are already in a decent place with it, and having more staff has really helped advance that, but we do need to put a few more staff buildings in place to cope with that demand. We also need to ensure that we don't start spending too much money on those facilities, and we'll also need to split our work areas, but that's something I can address after our build for today. Today's speed build is going to focus on two things: creating a path system that'll be the main thoroughfare through our new area. It's going to loop around that lake right at the base of the mountain and have some bridges crossing over all of the rivers. You'll notice as we build this, I haven't yet done any terrain painting and other detailed parts, but I do plan to do that another time. The initial terraforming was purely to give us a base to work towards, and for my first time doing that sort of thing, I'm really happy with how it's turned out, and I'm looking forward to decorating it all and finishing it off. The idea here is that we have this main series of paths running all the way around our park, and we can have others branching off, but we're looking to create some large habitats, some exhibit buildings, and I might even design some small resort style buildings. Even though the game doesn't have hotels and things in, I think it would really finish things off and add some nice decoration to the zoo. And there are a lot more resort tools and things like that with the expansion pack, where we get you can have parked cars and things like that, the little safari jeeps and things. I mean, that's really cool, and I'm looking forward to using that sort of stuff in these new builds. I want to get the path as close to the edge of the lake and rivers as possible, but also leave a few areas where I can have habitats in the lake too. Of course, we can have a boat tour going through the lake and possibly into one of the river areas. And I think that'll look really cool and really help flesh things out and make this huge experience for guests. I really did have a lot of fun designing it. Although nothing was pre-designed, I just kind of went with the flow, but for a first timer, I think it looks really good, and I'm looking forward to fleshing it out and filling it with animals. Some of our newer habitats are going to be absolutely huge. Before I recorded the audio for this, I had a look at the habitat that we'd built, and you'll see it's like 13,000 square meters, which is absolutely huge. However, that gives us the ability to split them into smaller areas and make adjustments as we go. I just thought it would be important to get this blueprint down and start giving ourselves a far larger platform to build on than what we currently have. Maybe we bite off more than we can chew, but I'm sure we'll find out. It does lead me to think about what I'll do long term with my Planet Zoo builds though. I'll probably lean more towards creating thematic zoos that are appropriate for the continents that they're based in. So creating a huge African safari or something based in America, taking inspiration from their national parks and things like that. But I'd prefer this current zoo to have a bit of everything, so I've got a real testing ground here and I can play around to my heart's content while creating a huge habitat area for different animals. Our first new habitat's actually going to be African themed. I took a little bit of inspiration from the Mwiba Wildlife Reserve in Tanzania. The keepers there constructed this purpose-built watering hole to provide a permanent source of water in the area, and then observed a multitude of different species sharing that area. You can see the same thing happening when seasonal droughts end with heavy rainfall and bring wildlife back to the same locations year in, year out. And I really like the idea of having a multitude of animals in this one space, and we've actually got a number of them in the zoo right now. We've got our ostriches in storage, which happened a few episodes ago because they were getting so panicked and scared because they had a small habitat and nowhere to hide, as well as our warthogs and African buffalo, who all benefit from interspecies enrichment. We'll probably add giraffes and zebras into that mix, and that should create this beautiful mix of African animals and give us plenty to do as we develop and decorate the area over the next few episodes. It also means we can then kickstart the redevelopment of our entrance area once we've moved those animals into the bigger habitat, which we'll mark out as soon as we've finished the pathing. The pathing we're doing is simply a basic outline, as I've said. I'll be making a lot of developments to it and making some decorative adjustments to them as I progress with the build. I'm quite happy with the initial groundwork so far. It doesn't look like much, but it's a decent start in my book and I can really visualise where it's going to go in the future. And since I've started getting used to the barriers, pathing and decorative stuff, I'm finding things a lot easier, so the builds are happening quicker and with a great deal of efficiency, which is actually making it a lot more of an enjoyable process for me. And this sort of work's becoming fun as opposed to this necessary chore. I just love it if guests recognise walls as physical barriers and didn't walk through them, and being able to place paths in a better way would be great too, but the fun in it is eventually working out how to make the mechanics we have in place work in our favour, so I don't really put this out as a complaint. Everyone knows that there are certain frustrations about every single game, but what Frontier have created is an absolute classic in my opinion, and for every little issue there's something incredible about the freedom of creativity that you have with this game. I also have a few plans coming up to put some bigger buildings in, like we're going to do a reptile house for exhibit animals and a larger creepy crawlies building which would be part of our entrance. When I was testing things out I played with the idea of 2-story buildings, but it never really came off well, and it was probably again because I was trying to cram too much into a small area and it wasn't working out. I also had a lot of issues when you'd build like an upstairs path and clipping happened, so it was telling you that you couldn't build here and things like that. But again, that was probably because I was building too low and not going high enough to create these new buildings that I wanted to do. I mean, what we could actually do is make the area between some of our bridges like a canal system and increase the water depth in between those two main bridges going across that river that I've got. And then we could create some viewing areas with raised water that actually looks thematic, as if we've dammed off a certain section of it. You know, I think that would be really quite nice to see if we can make it work and turn it into some sort of... I suppose we could make a building going over that entire stretch of water. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. And I'm about to continue getting ahead of myself because I want to tell you about another plan that I had. So, as you come in the entrance to the right, there's quite a large patch of space that I've left open. And that's because I'd quite like to dig down in that and put in kind of like a quarry that's been converted for the purpose of the zoo, and we'll make an area below sea level and experiment with some underground exhibits and habitats. But I am getting carried away, so let's talk about our new supersized habitat. One thing I wanted to focus on in these new builds is integrating staff areas with the habitats, which is why I want to create a staff building that backs onto the barrier. So we're putting a shack with a keeper hut in there as well as a staff room, and we could also put our transformer in here too, as this is a larger zoo build now. We're probably going to have our resources very spread out. One other thing I'd like is for buildings to count towards barriers actually, just to go back to the game's mechanic. I'll be making the area around this staff building a null barrier as a test, but I expect the animals are just going to walk through the wall and start taking over the park, which, given the amount of animals we're going to put in here, could be an absolute nightmare. But I'm going to test that theory anyway. So for this building we're going with a mix of plaster and the wood logs. We'll probably put a corrugated iron roof on there as well, and as you can see, I'm having a bit of trouble with flooring and getting the internal structure done, and in future I'll have to remember to build my walls first before adding flooring, because I think that's where my issues have come from. I'm going to put wood flooring in the entrance area and then use mud in the storage rooms that I've created. What we'll do then is we'll fill them with some interesting items just to add a bit more detail to the building, and put some signage up and a few other things to make it really stand out. As always, I'll be customising the barriers as well and potentially modify them a bit so we can put in some extra viewing galleries similar to that saltwater crocodile habitat. I'm going to now use, you probably hear me talking about this saltwater crocodile habitat a lot because I'm now using that as my baseline for this creation, because it took a few episodes. I added bit by bit off camera as well, and what's turned out is probably the best habitat I've ever done. I know it's small and some of the more experienced players will probably disagree with me, but in terms of comparing it to my first habitats and the warthogs and ostrich one, that is a huge step in actually learning the game and making things look a lot more dynamic and interesting to look at. Obviously, I will continue touch-ups off camera because next episodes I want to get the actual area for the animals decorated. And I had a few issues with the building when I put the second storage room in, and I wanted to make like a storage area for food, but nothing seemed to work right. And after multiple attempts, I just decided to put some pots and other things in there as if they were being stored for other parts of the park. We're just coming around now to put in the finishing touches on this. I've got one more room left to kit out, but I think kind of filling it up with like bits of fluff just to make it look a little bit more lived in, for want of a better word. So giving it a bit of character and making it a bit more three-dimensional than just this empty room with nothing really to speak of in it. It also means when we're doing kind of like the flyby tours of the zoo, there's actually going to be something interesting to look at rather than just these vast vacant spaces with nothing really thematic about them. Obviously, once I unlock a little bit more of the research, I'll have more to play with. This is what I was talking about earlier with wanting to fill them with straw or some sort of food source for the animals. Didn't really work out. I tried a bit with thatched roofs and stuff like that, and it just didn't look how I wanted it to look. So unfortunately, we just had to end up putting some pots and stuff in and just make it look like extra bits and pieces that were saved in storage for another time. Here you can see me about to start experimenting with the thatching, and it just does not look good at all. It would be really nice if we could get some like hay bales or something. I don't know if they're actually in the game because, like I said, I've not actually unlocked all of the research yet. I've still got quite a bit to go on that. But we could also just really lean in and do some custom stuff by combining bits of wood and little sticks and stuff. If we can dye them multiple colours, we can then make little stacks and make it look vaguely how I want it to look. But it hasn't worked out this time. That's what it's about. It's just experimenting and stuff. Obviously at the moment the barriers are really cutting through the walls and making it look all garish and horrible, but we're going to sort that. What we'll do is we'll make them null barriers. We'll see how the animals cope with it. We could always put some rocks in and around it to hopefully seal it off completely. We'll just have to see how it goes once we actually test this and open it all up. I don't know why I decided to draw the barriers down, considering I was making them null barriers anyway, but that's just part and parcel of my weird way of doing things. So you can see here, our doorway is just open to the elements. It's also a little bit off center, and what we've had to do is create our new plasterboard wall just by rotating pieces and fitting them in so they sit flush with the rest of the wall. I do think it turned out pretty well. It certainly looks like it's supposed to look, and part of the actual building itself, not just this jutting out mess. And obviously I just needed to go around and repeat the process on the internal wall because it doesn't quite match up, given that those plaster boards are quite thin, as you can see there. So we just duplicated it and moved it into place a little bit. Final few touch-ups, and it was pretty much a solid object, looking like it was meant to be a solid piece all along. The last thing I needed to do was just bring these barriers nice and tight up against the wall, and we will play around with that off camera and see what else I can do to make that fit in a bit better, because at the moment it just looks a little bit ramshackle and like lazy, which I don't like to do. We may actually right angle those barriers off and match them right up alongside the wall and see how that looks, make a little deck area. Coming around to the final finishing touches now, we're just going to put some log posts in just to add further dimension to this building, and we'll create some window trims with the shorter posts, varying the amount that's sticking out of the ground just like that. Bit in, bit out, yep, and just keep doing that, and then we'll duplicate it for the other lower portion. We may even run this theme all the way around the building, but I think just like a couple of touches here and there makes it stand out nicely. So we're just going to finish with a little montage. I'm very happy with the progress that we're making here. I really enjoy playing this game and learning it as we go. I hope you're enjoying these playthroughs too, and the content in general. I would really appreciate it if you continued supporting my channel by following my playlists, dropping me a subscribe and liking my videos. Thanks again guys, and I will see you all next time.